All right, Bible study again. We are in the Old Testament book of Zechariah. This is all about chapter 6. And chapter 6 has two sections, so we're going to try to get through both sections. There's a lot of information in here. The first part is titled The Four Chariots. And so when you read through these verses, the four chariots are named, they are addressed with color. You have your red horses, your black, your white, and your dappled. And they're described as the four spirits of heaven and that they are all powerful. But if you take time to remember that red represents war, black represents famine, white, victory, and then the dappled color is death or judgment. Now we see that the black horses are sent north. North was like to Babylonia, where Israel's Judah's enemies were. White went west, dappled south. So the colors and horses are God's power and judgment that patrol the earth. It's his watchful presence is always there, is always amongst the earth, ever present. The vision states that they go out and throughout the earth, and it ends with the emphasis on the land in the north. Remember, this is Israel's enemies. If you look back in Zechariah Chapter 2, verse 6, you'll read it there. This is like Babylonia. So this is saying that God is going to bring rest in this area because God's going to bring judgment and reestablish order there. Now, the rest of chapter 6, verses 9 through 13, are titled A Crown for Joshua. Remember, we've talked about Joshua in this chapter, and we also talked about Joshua and Haggai and his buddy that's helping, Zerubbabel. So now if you read the rest in chapter 6, it talks about these three exiles that are coming from Babylonia. Heldai, which means robust, Tobijah, which means God's goodness, and Jedediah, which means God knows. Don't know if I pronounced those correctly, but they are exiles that are coming to the land of Judah, and they are going to give gifts of silver and gold, okay? But this is where I thought it was pretty cool. They start to mention Zephaniah here, which we studied, or I shared here, the book of Zephaniah a couple months ago, but he is mentioned here. He was the prophet that had talked about judgment to come. And so here it mentions his son, Josiah. And for Zechariah to go to his home, because that is where the Babylonian exiles, the three men that I just said, were going to be there with the gold and silver. So he was to go immediately and to meet them there. Okay? And Josiah, if you do a little digging, is most likely the grandson of the priest that's mentioned in Jeremiah 29:29, who read a letter of encouragement to Jeremiah the prophet. So this Josiah, he comes from a priestly family. So together, these gifts and things, this is going to make an ornate crown for the high priest Joshua, which back then priests didn't wear crowns. Like, that wasn't seen as something that the priest wore. But the crown would represent a position of honor for Joshua. It represents the head of Judah's religious leader, okay? And remember, he's going to be with his buddy Zerubbabel, who was the governor of Judah. Together, they were leading the people to rebuild the temple, okay? And they were going to, not by my might, but by God's Spirit, when we studied earlier, that these two were going to work together. The Lord was going to lead them, and they're both mentioned as representing like the olive trees that we recently studied. And here Joshua is mentioned as the branch, okay? And this can also show symbolism for like the coming Messiah would also be like a priest and a king. I thought that was pretty cool. And Zerubbabel, he also was referred to as the branch, and he was in the line of David, so like a king. So I thought that all this symbolism is kind of coming together. So then we see that God will use the crown as a memorial or a beacon for other exiles to come and help build God's temple. like to come be a part of God's land, be under Him, be ruled by Him, follow Him. And this will happen only if you obey. That wraps up that chapter. And I thought that was beautiful. The Messiah who was, is, and is to come. Pretty neat. I love how all this symbolism starts coming together. All right, we're going to take some time to sit in chapter 7 and go through that next. So make sure you're subscribed and following along.